What's up, everyone? Welcome to our podcast. I am your host, Elias Haddad, and I am here with my good friend and co host, David Conley. Today, we have our very first guest. My uncle by only 7 years. Are you 7 years older than me? Yeah, 7 years. So he's more like 6 years older than me. 5 years. Or no, you're going to turn 47 this year.
Yeah, in August.
Okay. So this is perfect because we talk about midlife. You're right in the middle of this shit.
So good.
My uncle Rodney Simon, he's a cardiologist from LA. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we're gonna pick your brain about what you think about midlife and where you're at in your own midlife.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'm a preventive cardiologist in Los Angeles. I have a small solo practice. I do some internal medicine as well. I was trained in med peds, so I actually technically am a pediatrician by training in Cleveland, and then I did cardiology in New York City, and then moved out to LA. My wife's from there, so that's how I ended up in La La Land. But basically, I've been there about 9 years, so things are going pretty well. I do a lot with prevention. A lot of times I sort of experiment with my own health and sleep and nutrition, and carry that over to my patients. So that's sort of what I do.
Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed about you is, like, I feel like you're one of those doctors that actually cares about their patients, where you'll sit there and listen to them. And I think I learned that when you had a little stint in like Bowling Green, Kentucky,
Yeah.
where like you were still taking calls from patients from Bowling Green because you were just like,
Yeah. Do you remember that?
remember
Yeah.
that.
That's interesting what people remember about you. Yeah. So there was a few patients that wanted to keep in touch or ask my advice, even though I'd moved to Los Angeles. And, I think every organization has a different philosophy on how they take care of their clients or customers or patients. I've always felt like if you really do a good job, patients will reward you for that. So we do get really good reviews. We try to be very patient centric, but always try to do what's best for the patient. So there are patients who, for example, are non-compliant. So we have to have a conversation with them on whether this is the right clinic for them or not. So I don't like to fire patients, but I will if they don't really want to follow the program. That's not sounds negative, but I think it's just important to kind of set some standards with your patients and not sort of bend backwards. I think there's this idea like the customer's right always in business and stuff. So I think the idea for me is like, I think I know what's right for you. We'll do a patient client or whatever you want to call it. In medicine, they call it shared medical decision making. So you present some options for patients. You hope they do the right thing. So, but yeah, I did have some patients who were still reaching out to me. And I think one of them, the daughter told me, oh, my mom eventually passed away. I want to let you know about it. So, and this was years later, actually. So.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find in doctors nowadays, especially. It's just like it's become like a factory in that. So Dave is actually writing a book about midlife, and we've had several conversations about it. And I guess on a health perspective, for people that are hitting that age between, what is midlife considered the age? You said 38 to 58?
38 to 52.
38 to 52. What are you seeing in that age group that are coming up on health wise that people our age should be aware of or should be doing in that sense?
Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in aging and the whole process. I've sort of read a lot about aging, and I think the number one thing people, obviously there's issues with mental health and suicide and physically people start changing. I think that takes them by surprise, that physical change. We know for a fact like lung capacity goes down, and almost every organ starts deteriorating, the kidneys, and it's a very slow process. Like I'm very slow, so you don't really notice it. And so I think it's very important for people as they get into that mid-age to be very aware of that. And I'm certainly aware of it. I can't certainly do what I did when I was younger. But on the other hand, there's articles about people in their 70s, 80s running better marathons than they did when they were 50. So there's no generalization, but in general, I think people, don't tend to sleep as well. Maybe they overdo it with the exercise, or they don't exercise enough. And I think just things start changing a little bit. Just very subtle changes happen, but I think that it's very important just to be aware of what's going on with your body as you get a little older, and you can sort of mitigate those problems.
I think, I mean, you're in the cardiologist realm. What are you seeing as like best practices as far as like keeping our heart going? I mean, that's like that's everything, right? Like,
It's the
I mean,
Keep it going. Yeah, you really need it.
I mean, there's always
You
that
only got
theory.
one.
Well, there's just that theory. You only get
Yeah.
so many ticks, right? Like, you know what I mean? How many clicks does it go, and then it just runs out like a battery?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe, but
There is that idea. I don't know if that's been proven, but certainly, yeah. I mean, I think what happens at this age too, people start developing hypertension, number one. And, technically it's went back and forth in the medical community, the cardiology community, what normal blood pressure is, but usually it's 120 over 80. Now in pediatrics, it's sort of like based on their age and sort of their height, and that's how they calculate blood pressure. You can find those tables in kids, but that's speaking of kids. Just briefly, we're seeing more obesity in kids, and that's going to carry over into their middle age. So, really, I'm very concerned about that when I see kids drinking juice or eating poorly. It's gonna their middle age is going to come in their 20s.
that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So sleep apnea. We've talked about sleep apnea in kids. All these problems that were coming in the 30s and 40s, 50s are probably going to come in their 20s. Kids do get hypertension. But I think once you develop hypertension, that hardening of the arteries, which should come later, if at all, you can go a little bit downhill. Obviously, exercise and good sleep, good nutrition helps. There are some patients that don't want to take meds. I tell them to do these isometric hand grip exercises. You can actually drop blood pressure by 10 points just by doing those, squeezy balls.
Really?
Yeah, you can drop blood pressure by 10 points just by doing that.
That's
actually.
interesting.
So
I
if
have
you
one
want,
in my office, I use it all the time.
it's actually very healthy. I have a few doctor patients, and there tend to be ones that don't want to take medicines, ironically. So
I just saw a study that said 43% of cardiologists, your peers,
yeah,
are obese or overweight.
I wouldn't be surprised by that by one bit. And I also like to be a model for my patients. So I do spend a lot of time on my health. Sometimes I tell people cardiology is my hobby. My real job is my body.
Mm.
And I think people get it backwards. You were talking about the business of healthcare. So, and that's changing. That's a different conversation, but a lot of people are spending their time on their career. And I'm like, that's not your job. Your job is to stay healthy, and that career will just come with it, And it's a funny saying that I came up with. Like, your hobby should be your health, your job, and your real job is actually staying alive. And so
enjoying this existence.
Well, if you stay around longer, everything will accumulate. If you think about it, even just think about the time value of money. If you're around 10 years longer and you invested in it, you'll end up with more money than if you, and Eli knows this, we've had a lot of people in our families die young. So, if they just spent more time on their health, they would have been better off than worrying about, making a buck or something.
Yeah. So I have two uncles who are Rodney's, actually three uncles. examples that are
Yeah,
Rodney's brothers. I don't think any of them made past 53.
yeah,
Mm.
they were in their mid 50s. They all
Yeah,
died
so
in
they
their
were
mid-50s.
obese, just terrible health, no exercise.
And
Uh,
talking about midlife, I do think it's fascinating. People get into the whole idea of drugs and addiction and stuff. One of them actually was, I would say, addicted to gambling, but
Mm.
you see in all three of them a little bit of like isolation at the end, before. And I think that is something worth discussing. And I've actually been very interested recently in dementia and Alzheimer's, and I just finished a book by Sanjay Gupta called Staying Sharp, and he was talking about a nursing home in Europe where they create a restaurant, a bar, a grocery store in the nursing home. So
Mm.
the idea is to create like a community. So you're like still actively looking like you're doing stuff. But right now, nursing homes are just this room, and you have no interaction with anybody. I think if I was to pick one thing for people to stay healthy, is to not be isolated. And all this social media stuff is making people more isolated. So you really need to be engaged with people. And I think men tend to be less interested in that than women. Well, that's probably one of the reasons why women live longer. But
Dave, can you talk about so you just moved to Miami. How did you create your community around where you're at? Because Dave. So just quick story. I'll give you where Dave was from DC. Like I think he squatted on somebody's house in San Francisco or something like that.
Yeah. I
Now
just
he's
moved
squatting
into
in
an empty
somebody's
place.
house in
No.
Miami. But just to give you the cliff notes of what happened. But and Dave basically just went. Did you know more than a couple people when you got there?
In Miami? No.
Yeah. Yeah. So he just showed up. And imagine being
Miami's a tough city.
tough city. So how did you create community? And I think it sounds like that creating community is something that's elongates your life a little bit.
I think so.
Oh, totally. I've heard it over and over again. Is loneliness and isolation is the new smoking.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
with sitting, like we're meant to move, we're meant to be social. We've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years, and when we cut that off and we just trigger the same neurological processes with social media, it is not there, right?
Mhm.
It feels right, but it isn't right. You got to be in and around people. So I was very planned out as to what I wanted to do, dropping into a new city. And the first was reaching out to the people that I love, my friends and my family all over the planet, and just asking them, hey, is there anybody I should know in Miami? And well, you'll find out what somebody thinks about you really quick if if they introduce you to somebody, you're like, oh my God. But those that you love, definitely it's that associative property of awesomeness. They're going to know awesome people. They're going to know just fabulous human beings. And they're going to be like, yes, you should meet this person. And then, make friends with them, spend time with them. And then you keep on going. You build up this network of people, and also knowing how to make friends. I completely agree with you, Rodney. I don't think men are naturally geared to this, particularly when we're under stress. We tend to isolate. Women tend to congregate, and that isolation is like, okay, I got, it's like, I'll be the stoic, strong dude when, you're actually at your lowest. So so learning how to make and foster friendships, connecting with people, which is increasingly weird with more technology. There's so much value in getting together with people, and if you're using technology, I'm also doing a lot more video with people. I mean, we've had that with Zoom, but I'm sending video texts to folks, and there's so much more information that comes across rather than just your voice or a text. You can't. Remarkable how people read into your text because it's in their head. They're saying it in their head, and whatever their mood is, they're going to be really like, like if you do a sure without an exclamation point, an emoji, like we have all of that crap in order to try and convey more information. But this conversation is giving all of the social cues. And when you're in person with somebody, you get even more. I mean, just down to the hormones that are coming out into the room. Then it was finding those people in Miami and finding out what their communities are and seeing how those communities are, seeing how those communities fit with things that I love to do. I have, a bit of a spiritual community, some of the fun stuff that we do, Eli and I, and just going to events and going to things. Now, Miami is just wide open, unlike a lot of the country. So you can go to a lot of things. I also belong to groups that have a global presence. And those global presences tend to have just the kind of people that I resonate with. And a lot of them are here. They're decamped from New York and LA and San Francisco. And they'll just inviting strangers that are in communities and say, hey, let's go grab, I got a table for 6 at the school restaurant. You want to come? So just being social, making friends, and asking. So nobody can read your mind. And so when you just say, and it's like, oh man, I'm having a little bit of loneliness and things are not great right now. You want to just go out and just grab a cup of coffee, get a drink, whatever it is. The stuff that you love to do and the people who are loving that, man, you can meet all sorts of people. And for the introverts out there and the people who are not that social, it's just getting into the stuff that lights you up and talking about the things that light you up. And all of those factors come together. And I just had almost too much to do. I was drinking too much. I was eating poorly, and that cratered my health. And so I had to put all of that on hold, realizing that it was too much. But all of those factors together, and people just get to know you. That's what it is. That's how I built like a large community down here.
Yeah, it was quick.
Yeah,
so
4 weeks.
You had like a plan with moving to Miami. That was sort of pre-programmed, like I want to go there and do something specific?
No, serendipitous. It really, the opportunity showed up. I don't have personally a lot of things like kids or a major relationship. And so I have the flexibility in my vocation to also just pull up and go someplace. And I love that, right? I know a lot of people tend to stay where they are, but you can do these same practices wherever you are. It's like, your social circle is small. Just go through it and like, how can you grow that? And suddenly you can go from just a few close friends, which you'll always have, to a bunch of acquaintances and their acquaintances and their acquaintances. Get off the social media and get into real life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the tough part. I am 100% an introvert. And what I realized is like, I'm pretty charismatic. So people think that I'm an extrovert. So it's like people are like, oh, this guy. And I was sitting at my daughter's ballet class, and it was one of these talkative moms. And I'm just like, lady, I don't like to talk to people. and she's trying to conversate with me. And I'm like, just sitting there like, and I'm just like forcing myself to do it because I just naturally, if I don't know you, and it's just, something resonated with me that you said is that until there's that moment of something that actually interests me, I'm not going to talk. Right. And then so we she started talking because Bridget had mentioned that I bought a farm to her at the last ballet class. And so she started talking to me about farms, and then I finally opened up a little bit to her. So it was very much as an introvert, it's tough. And I have to move to St. Louis. So now it's like, I got to meet groups of people, but the world community that I've always connected with is the Burning Man community. Anywhere I go, basically, there's somebody there that I can connect with. And and you kind of have, especially that group, they have like their 10 principles already in place. So there's like it's almost like, I always joke, but it's like a new religion almost, because some people take it to that extent. The camp that I'm going to, if they host a burn this year, 20 plus year camp at Burning Man, like, you should just read their group. I'm in their Facebook group, and it's like, it's no different than a church. I mean, like, I can imagine that a Facebook group community is that, but there is that community that people want. I mean, I think at the root of it, the whole premise of my real estate office is that we maximize our office sizes to 150 people because you cannot build meaningful relationships with more than 150 people.
Yeah.
So, and the whole premise, and when I go through my recruiting interviews with people, the one word that comes up more than anything is community, because there's been a loss of that in our industry.
Yeah.
Because we are all independent contractors, but
Yeah.
we still want that place to go bitch about clients, you know?
Hey, Rodney, what
Yeah.
did you like medical school? Was it something that you really enjoyed?
I actually did. I think that it gets a bad reputation, and I think it is definitely in need of reform. I think if you think about it, it's a lot of rote memorization that's not useful. And you can find it in a book now or even on Google, half of it. But I think what it teaches you is to really understand, appreciate the body and the complexities that come with it. It's very difficult to sort of figure that out on the internet without that basic fundamental understanding. But what my approach is I ended up doing a master's in public health first in epidemiology, which has actually become very useful in a setting of a pandemic and public health crisis. So, and epidemiology can sort of understand the etiology of disease more than, for example, the physiology. So, for example, like, when you go to med school, you learn that's in a very simple way, smoking causes lung cancer, and the tissue pathology behind that and the risk factors, et cetera. Epidemiology is basically how they pieced together through a puzzle that wasn't that complicated now when you think about it, that smokers have higher risk for lung cancer. Or, for example, like a lot of people know this. This is a study that was done on like nuns, that nuns don't get cervical cancer for the most part. They're not sexually active, so cervical cancer is an STD for the most part. Now there's oral cancer, et cetera, from HPV, et cetera. So it's you can find certain behavioral things, sort of just even like COVID, like certain behaviors increase your risk for COVID, et cetera. So it's a nice blend between the epidemiology and the pathophysiology. So because I did that, I didn't mind med school, but I didn't go straight through. And I think that's where I think I didn't feel the rush, like I had to like go through quickly. So I took my time and I enjoyed it. Actually, I really appreciated it. And I was actually in the middle of my class, but for some reason, people always thought I was at the top of the class because I was so engaged in med school. And, so it was just really, it was a good time. And I enjoyed most of residency and a lot of fellowship. It got a little bit easier. But I think you have to really see a big picture in it. I kind of imagine that I would do what I'm doing years down the road. I think most people think I'm just going to get a job. And I would encourage any doctor listening to try to go out on their own and do their own thing and not be delegated by hospitals and, corporations that want to, tell them how to practice. I think that's where we went wrong with healthcare.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. From my personal experience, you are a tremendously rare breed. I have to, whenever I drop into anywhere, I have to go through and interview health professionals, whether it's Eastern or Western, and find out if they have a systemic view of the human, because we are, as specialized as anybody is, a lot goes into it: mind, body, heart, all these things are factors. And that the American medical system is awfully good at putting bombs back together once they've gone off, but not so great at all of the lifestyle, all of the different modalities, and all of the things that can be put in that are ways of living and mindsets. It's not just diet. It's not just, so you can do all these things. So how do people find more doctors that have this curiosity of, my doctors are like, I don't know, let's go find out. right? And we'll run the
Yeah,
tests and we'll do that.
it's
So how do they find people like you?
so first of all, you're right. We are the rare breed, but it's changing. I will recommend a couple things that may guide you to the right path. There's a Egyptian doctor, actually, Marty Makari. He's been on the news a lot. John Hopkins trained hematologist. His dad was a doctor. He wrote a book called The Price We Pay that goes into all the costs of healthcare. And he actually, big part of the book is like there's a lot of wasted healthcare, and that actually a lot of people don't know this. A lot of times you don't have to pay those bills because you were never in a contract with that doctor or that hospital, and they never informed you about the costs. So I hear this all the time from even family or friends. Oh, I got this big bill and I have to pay it. And he argues in his book, well, you never signed a contract. And so they've actually went to a few hospital systems and made them stop going after patients for that. But what he talks about is some hope at the end of the road. One of the companies out of Miami, ironically, called ChenMed. I don't know if you've heard of ChenMed, started by a couple of brothers and their dad who thought he had cancer, but he didn't. And they were like, we got to change healthcare. So it is changing because of what's called Medicare Advantage and value-based care. So now I have a small contract like this where we get paid whether we see the patient or not. So the point of that is getting away from fee for service, being innovative, keeping patients healthy, not having to worry about getting paid because of doing a procedure or a test or whatever. So I actually love that because I put a lot of energy in like social determinants of health. And a lot of people don't know this. This is going to come out as not probably a surprise to you all, but about 80% of healthcare doesn't require a doctor. And that's really, it's not that when you hear it, it makes perfect sense. But a lot of doctors will push back and say, oh, no, we have to do all these tests to make sure this is what you don't have. Well, really the reality of it is it's a lot of behavioral. It's smoking, it's exercise, sleep, community engagement, et cetera. And actually patients start taking care of their health when they realize their doctor or their staff cares about them. So I even though I'm kind of a rare breed, it is sort of this quiet revolution. But we're facing a very difficult task. Doctors come out of training with a lot of loans, and they want a job that pays a lot of money to pay off those loans. And in some ways, I kind of did that, and then I paid off those loans and moved on to what I really wanted to do. So I would encourage doctors to even start as a hybrid, or think 10 years ahead. And I think that's the problem with people is they just think I'm going to get a job at Kaiser or this big hospital system and stay there and retire there. And, I think, things are changing slowly, but I think it's a very important thing. Probably the pandemic has helped a little. People like Marty Makari, ChenMed, other organizations are making a change. And I think more doctors saying, I don't want to be part of the system. I want to be a flexible doctor who works 20 hours on telehealth and 10 hours on research and 10 hours with doing consulting with like supplement and doing podcasts and whatever. So that's kind of my life anyway. So this is not something foreign to me, even just this podcast. I've done podcasts before. I think most doctors for a long time are like, what is this? I would never get on a podcast. And even their employers may restrict them from doing podcasts, or throwing out the name of who they work for. Or as you see on Twitter, like, oh, I can't comment about anything because I work for this employer, just very stifling to me.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, Amit.
Yeah.
He gets pushback from the University of Kentucky all the time because he was
Yeah.
doing his own marketing. And
I
they're
know
like,
him
"Stop."
well, and we've talked about getting him out of that, that system and going on his own. So.
Yeah, it's actually a common, and I'm finding it's between. I've got a couple of friends that are doctors. Michael Dawson, who actually does all of the COVID testing in Fayette County. He's the chain of cars that go through where he does all of that. He was and he's been doing podcasting for about 2 years as well. And there's this pushback from the there's groups of doctors that you just know got in it because their parents told them they got to be doctors, and they're in it because
Yeah.
that's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're expected to do. Sorry, not supposed to. And then there's a group of doctors that are in it because they genuinely want to help people. They
Mhm.
got into it because they're in their nature is caring and taking care of people. But then they get into the system where basically, I mean, capitalism is the greatest system in the world, but I think we have to kind of have some kind of regulation on it is in the healthcare system. For me, I don't think the healthcare system should be a for-profit system. And I know that's a very socialist way of looking at it, but when you think about something that is, you know, the basic need of breathing, it's like staying
Well, it's
alive.
a service, right? It's a service that we actually don't know the price of.
Exactly.
It's like it's not capitalism now. It's some sort of like mystery, and like
Yeah.
who needs that? I spend an enormous amount of money on healthcare because it's not covered by my stellar insurance, and I have doctors that try to work with insurance companies, but when it gets down to it, the insurance companies and the drug manufacturers and the rest of it have formulas of how they can make money and continue this. And so when you deviate from what everyone else is doing, even though we are precious snowflakes, right? Like what's true for me, but my genetics, my environment, my lifestyle are completely different than Eli, completely different than Rodney. And dumping me into everything else would have killed me eventually. And
Yeah.
that's the learning about yourself, learning enough of your body and mind to be a bit dangerous, and having the medical professionals there that are going to be there for you and just as weird and curious as need to be. Let's go find out. If I could just print out t-shirts and give it to medical professionals, it's that thing right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they call it a practice. It's not
Yeah.
Right.
it's a practice. It's literally a
And
practice.
scientists,
We're
right? Like
practicing.
scientists are meant to be like, I don't know, let's go find out.
Yeah, there was I forgot the name of the book. It's a sort of like digital transformation and healthcare, and guy out of San Francisco, and he was talking about how it's normal now for doctors to just Google things in front of their patients, where like
Sure.
5 or 10 years ago, you would like sneak away and do it in the back room because you were like, you didn't want patients to know you didn't know everything.
Mm.
And now patients come to me all the time with things. I'm like, well, shit, I don't know, so
Right.
I've never heard of this, and no doctor can know everything about the healthcare. This is, I can't remember the exact statistic, or the fact, those science books that they learn in med school are, half of it is not even true by the time it's published.
Right. Science moves on, right?
It moves on really quickly. And we saw that with COVID.
Yeah.
It evolved dramatically. COVID was a perfect example of it. And that's what I love about it. And I've done some podcasts with other doctors. One of them does some news stuff, and she was like, people don't realize like science is very messy. It's a very messy thing to get to the facts, and again, COVID understood that people died because of that, but there's no way around it. And I get it. People get frustrated with Fauci, and he's not perfect, but what he's doing is trying to say that, well, there's no evidence for this, or there's no facts, there's no research study. And, I think there could be a hybrid in saying, well, we can't wait all day, and, for that, we need to sort of, and that's where the emergency use stuff came in. Those are not approved drugs yet. They're just an EUA for the time being, and they will get approved. The vaccine's the same.
Well, they've been around for 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the research has been
Yeah,
around.
we've done this with SARS.
Yeah. And so I think what ended up happening, and I experienced this here in my own office. I was literally in my office, and there were 4 people in the office, myself and 3 other people, and the other 3 people were not taking the vaccine. 75% of the people in the room were not taking the vaccine. I had already taken it. I've been inoculated and all that good stuff. But their argument to me is like, well, they at first it was just it was going to be 2 months of lockdowns, and then this happened, and then so they basically were seeing like this supposed-
Absolutist.
yeah, there was this supposed like authority saying this is the way it's going to be, and then they kept moving the goalposts, and I'm like, yo, the reason the goalposts kept moving is because the data kept changing.
Yeah.
So like, and it's to try to explain that to just 80% of the population that the data has been changing. That is the reason that the vaccine and the other thing is that another good example of it was they didn't want people to use masks because they didn't want to run a shortage, and they just weren't honest with the American people about it. So they went out and says, you don't need masks just yet. And then, 2 months later, it's like, yeah, everybody should be having masks. But the reality is like, we're worried about a shortage on masks. And but when the COVID thing first started, I went and picked up masks anyway.
Yeah, of course, right?
I was at Lowe's. I picked up all these N95 masks, but then I ended up donating all of them to the hospital. And it was kind of crazy, but because nobody knew what was going on. Those like, remember those
the suits
things?
Yeah.
So when it first happened, my buddy Amit posted that they were looking for these kind of suits. So I posted it on my Instagram, and then I got a connection with some demo company. I ended up getting like 20 of these suits from the University of Kentucky that they never ended up using, actually. And the guy gave them away, but we didn't know that was
biohazard.
Yeah, it was literally in March. It's like these biohazard suits that they can have surgeries, and the hospitals were closed down for the whole 3 months.
Yeah.
I think Amit told me that the University of Kentucky was losing like $5 million a day or $3 million a day in what is it? Not unnecessary surgeries, but
elective surgeries.
Elective surgeries. Yeah. Because that's where they make their money is elective surgeries.
Yeah. So yeah, and going back to midlife crisis, I think if you think about it, that's what's happening. The goalpost is moved, the data has changed, and people don't adjust. Yeah. And that's what they need to do when they're in their midlife, is adjust to the circumstances. I will say two little vignettes about the mask. I did a podcast with my brother in March 2020, and it was literally a few days before the lockdown. And I was telling Eli about it, and he was like a sort of a business and healthcare podcast. And they asked me about the mask. And I said, well, I think it'd be great to wear one, but the shortage idea. But ironically, like there was not a clear message, and people got confused, and, the president was saying different things. So I think people sort of took that the wrong way. But I will tell you, the story about donating to the hospital. When the vaccines came out, they realized there's like the needles that draw out the vial, the fluid for the vaccine. There's a little bit of dead space in the needle where it doesn't get all of the material. And so I happen to have some of these sort of suction syringe needles that there's no needle, it's just suction. And so there's that little rubber thing, and you can suck out all the material. I happen to have them because my wife went through IVF, and they use these special syringe needles because the drugs are so expensive and you want to use every bit of that drug. And I happen to have like 3 or 4 boxes. So I gave them to the hospital. I said, and they had told me, and it's written public knowledge, like you sort of can get between 6 to 8 doses out of the vaccine vial, depending on how good the nurse is at pulling out the drug. So, and I said, hey, I have these different needles. Like, I want to show them to you. So I took them to the hospital, and there was this like 2 weeks of like debate. Well, can we use these needles? These syringes, because they're not really, they were brought in, and they're not really like,
they didn't come through the chain of command.
Chain of command and
sealed. Oh my God.
Yeah, they were definitely sealed and everything. All that, they were sterile, and they ended up using it. And then later they were like, I was like the hero. They finally used them. I'm like, we're getting like 3 extra doses out of the vaccine vial because otherwise, literally 2 to 3 extra doses. And that's 2 or 3 people getting vaccinated. They were like throwing those vials away, and they actually were like, we're going to order some, but we can't find them. So they couldn't find and then I text the IVF doctor, and I was like, hey, do you have any of these, like those, what I'm talking about, those little syringes? They're like needleless syringes, basically. They work on a suction system, not a needle. And there's like literally a dead zone. If you've ever seen a doctor drawback fluid from a vial. There's like some
Little source,
area
yeah.
between that you just can't get to,
Yeah.
unless you break the vial.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but it was just like an
One little
ordeal
thing.
for 2 weeks just to get one little thing done. And your point about donating the stuff and they're not using it, it's just very funny. So you're probably better off just keeping it.
I know. I
Mhm.
feel bad for the guy that donated it.
Rodney, what's for you? What's your midlife? What's your 40s? How is it? Contrast your 20s and 30s to your 40s, either health or relationships, vocation, or yourself. I mean, has anything been surprising to you?
Excellent question. So if you were to pull up old pictures of myself and now, I actually think I'm healthier and probably look younger. And that's like a crazy thing to think. So when I was in my 20s, I was at UK med school. They had pizza and Coke or Diet Coke for lunch almost every day. And we had like lectures, and it was like important to listen and learn and then just eat a quick lunch. And so I've seen pictures of myself, like my face looks swollen, and I probably drank more. I hardly ever drink now. As you brought up alcohol. I'm
Yeah.
not a big fan of alcohol. Anybody listening, sorry. I don't see any really good data.
think
I stopped too. I stopped, yeah.
I stopped.
Yeah.
We're all kind
So
of-
just really quick, increased risk of oral, lung, breast, ovarian, uterine cancer from smoking. People talk about the heart benefits. I think that's bogus personally.
From drinking.
From drinking
Yeah.
wine. There is a little bit of data, and I've argued with some cardiologists about this. By the way, it increases your risk for atrial fibrillation, which is an arrhythmia that can cause a stroke. So I'm not a huge fan of drinking. And I think by cutting down on drinking, partly because my wife doesn't drink, so I just sort of stopped drinking and realized I feel healthier. And when I do drink, it's one drink. But if I have 2 or 3 drinks, the next day I feel like somebody kicked me.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. So, and I know you're into water and drinking fluids. I think that's great. In that Staying Sharp book by Sanjay Gupta, he says that if your brain is dehydrated, even by 3%, you don't think straight. So I thought that was interesting that you're into the whole fluid and water. But anyway, I wasn't that healthy actually in my 20s and 30s. And even though I exercise, I've done triathlons, I've done marathons. I am healthier now because I do understand more about the microbiome. I edited a book on fiber and the prevention of cardiovascular disease, and I understand sleep way better than I did before. I also understand the benefits of nature. I was just talking to Eli about this book called The Nature Fix, how it's very important to be out in nature. And I just had a patient, I'm on vacation, and patient called me and said, I'm really jittery and anxious. He had a heart attack and in the past, and one of his best friend's son committed suicide. I was like, well, that's terrible. And, it's not always because of depression. A lot of people don't understand that. It's, like almost like Anthony Bourdain. I told him this story, like Anthony Bourdain didn't seem depressed. Sometimes it's just like people don't see a will to live. And it's not the same thing as depression. But
it's a chemical imbalance, right, in their brain. Is
see,
that what it is?
it's
Or is
not. It really isn't. And so that's more depression, the thinking behind depression. Sometimes people just get bored with life and they're like, I don't see a point. But if you can intervene, you could probably prevent it. Actually, there's a statistic out there, like 40% of people who commit suicide saw their primary doctor a month before.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask about that. And so we do ask a lot. But my point about that is that I told him, I said, I'm out of town. And my son and I were like having breakfast, and he was like babbling in the background. I'm like, sorry, but I was like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go for a walk and get outside. And I told him about the book. He texted me like an hour later. He said, I feel so much better. Thank you.
When you were talking about the suicide, I wanted to interject there, but there was actually, it was in Malcolm Gladwell's book.
I love his books.
Speaking with
I met him.
Speaking with Strangers or something like that.
Yes, yes, yeah. About
I'm
the
almost-
about the lady that
with the gas
yeah.
on suicide. Basically, they
Yeah.
were able to just create a delay in the ability to commit suicide by people used to just stick their head in a gas oven and kill themselves.
Hmm.
But so they created some way to
some like a delay.
yeah, there was just
Yeah.
a delayed effect on their ability to kill themselves, and it reduced suicides
Yeah.
in England by some
Yes,
crazy
yes,
amount.
yes.
And it just took them because it was just
Yeah.
that there was most of
Same
yeah,
with guns in the home.
Yeah.
If you lock them up or whatever, or
just
you
one
know.
thing that would do.
I do want to mention that I met Malcolm Gladwell in Manhattan on the street. I was fixing my phone at Sprint when I had a Sprint phone, and he walked right by, and he's just, you could tell who he was. And I ran out there. I was like, I told the Sprint lady, I'll be right back.
Mhm.
So I ran out there. I said, hey, Malcolm. And he turned around. I said, I know you. And I saw him a lot on C-SPAN. I said, I know a fact about you. You're related to Colin Powell. And because he's Jamaican, actually, from Canada. And so a lot of people don't know this. He's like, yeah, that's right. I said, yeah, I saw you on C-SPAN because we watched a lot of book TV.
Yeah.
And I said, I just finished your book and I'm about to start the next one. I think it was the 10,000 Hour book.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, that's a great book. And he was very nice. And
Yeah.
we chatted for a few minutes and he left.
I love his books. And actually, you know, as annoying as his voice is, I actually like it when he reads them. I hate his voice, but
He has a great podcast now
Yeah.
too.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah. It's not like this kind of podcast. It's like a story.
yeah. Well, that's how he writes books. Like
yeah.
if I ever were to write a book, I would want to write it like how he does it because he
Yeah.
basically gets his story across by, I mean, the last one I read was, I think it was Speaking to Strangers or Talking to
Yes.
Strangers.
Yeah. Talking to strangers.
Great book.
Yeah.
Great
He
book.
starts with the lady that got killed
Yeah. In
at
Texas.
it was just both the cop and her were just not on the same level.
Yeah.
You know,
They
and
just weren't speaking to her. But
Yeah.
then that was a case where she just basically was like, killed herself in prison.
she killed herself
Yeah,
in
so
prison. Yeah.
That was way off
and
subject, but
There could have been, there could have been an intervention there.
there could have been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I love his books. They're one of my favorites.
Yeah.
There's always something good to pull out of those.
Yeah, for sure. I hope I answered your question. We kind of diverged there a little bit, but I spent a lot of time, like I said, on my health.
Yeah.
I won't get into supplements and stuff, but I do take a few supplements here and there, and not a lot, but I'm not like taking 20 vitamins or anything like that. But I do take a few things. I think it's a lot of good nutrition, hardly any alcohol, and really good sleep and good relationship as well.
You're singing to on this. Also for me, experimentation. It's like, let's go find out, right? Like,
Yeah.
It's like, let's look at your health indicators. And for me, I as the big health indicators that I look at are resting heart rate variability, and seeing, that gives me an idea as to what's going on. And that
Mhm,
creates a
mhm.
curiosity of like, I just had 40 vials drawn, and excessive. I do not recommend that for folks, but it was giving deep information
Mhm, mhm.
rather than just a lipid panel. It's like, let's
Right,
look
right,
at the
right.
size of the molecules, right? Because one is not the same as the other. And let's look at intermuscular inflammation. Let's look at let's see where these things are going, and let's try some things. And it's not to be on the same supplements, be on the same things, be in common knowledge or like things that might be true for everybody, these truths, but let's see what's right for you. And so it's certainly what I also heard from you is getting into shape and paying attention to your health. Certainly for me, it is a lot of my money, a lot of my time, and something that I think people at midlife only start paying attention to when something shitty happens.
Mhm,
As a doctor told me, it's common in your 40s to have one of the big three: heart disease, cancer, or stroke. And
mhm, mhm.
what's also true is that if you are in some shape, if you are paying attention, then you will fully recover. But if you're not, obesity and movement and the rest of it, it could debilitate you,
Mhm, mhm.
or even kill you. And that's, we're seeing that earlier and earlier. But my point is that working with folks, and one of the most common misconceptions as I work with people on their health is they have this idea of they want to get into the shape that they were in their 20s. It's like, oh, I want to wear the same jeans. I want to look hot. I want to turn back the clock. And I'm like, well, if we try and get you into that shape and into that space, it could be very damaging and very problematic. We want you in the best shape of your 40s. And what I heard from you is it could be far better than where you were in your 20s and 30s. How do you shift that mindset on folks to say, look, you can get in amazing shape, but what's true for your life now isn't the same as when you were in your 20s and will not be the same when you're in your 70s?
So first of all, I think it's a cultural thing in the Western world where there's an ageism, there's a sort of like an elitism, there's an ageism where we discriminate against people who are older, who have wrinkles, who have aged. Let's face it, everything is about the young and beautiful. And I think what people have to get, and this is not going to be for everybody, especially like a place like Miami or Beverly Hills or whatever, where people want to look like fake look, like Botox and plastic surgery and stuff. Actually, one of my nephews was like, "Oh, how much Botox do you get on your face?" But I use an anti-inflammatory called astaxanthin. I'm a big fan of. And there's a brand of it called Xanthicin, but it's just a little stronger. But you can get astaxanthin at Whole Foods, and it's highly anti-inflammatory. It's actually in what's in fish, like salmon.
Is it a lotion or is it a pill?
It's a pill.
Yeah.
And I gave it to my accountant, and he went to his like facial specialist, and she was like, "Huh, this is weird. You're like have no acne or any blackheads to take off." And I was just surprised. Like my nephew knows I wouldn't do like Botox. I don't really care for it, but I think, and I've told my wife this, she uses obviously some skin products. I think if you think about your skin definitely emits health, right, to people. And really healthy skin, like your skin looks really good.
Oh,
water.
No. Actually, like a lot of what's going on is that my body has gone through a tremendous transformation the last 6 weeks. And it takes a while for this to kind of get through your skin, is what I've learned.
Right.
So I'm treating this as like it's not the top, but it's
but it's like an internal thing that comes out.
Yeah. So this is where I was and how my body is releasing it. And so I know it's going to be different 6 weeks from now. And that's for sure.
And my point is like skin is an internal thing, right? Yeah. If you go to a really good dermatologist, they're not going to say like, oh, you may need a few creams in this, but really a good dermatologist will tell you it's your diet, not too much sun. I do believe in a little bit of sun actually can help you sleep if you get sun at the right time, especially like 10 to 11. It just sort of helps you fit that circadian rhythm by turning off like melatonin and then turning it on at night when it's dark. But my point is that we need to, number one, accept the fact that aging is a good thing. It's okay. It's part of life. We can't live forever, although some people think they can. You can look really good in your 60s, 70s if you just take care of your. I'm always surprised. I was just in Nashville. I was telling Eli, was surprised about the amount of alcohol being drunk in the morning even, and people looked like, to me, very unhealthy, and I was disappointed in that, and in the sense that these people probably also go get facials and try to look good, but I'm like, really, if you cut down the alcohol and drink more water, you probably look much better than any amount of skin care that you're doing to your body, and so I think it's partly just understanding that, that needs to change. We need to be much more, and I also believe in like intergenerational, like that, this idea, like I brought our kid to a party with adults and he was the only kid. And I told the people, I'm bringing my kid and fine with it. And just have 4-year-olds hanging out with 4-year-olds. It's like, we grew up, you hung out with your elders. You learned from your elders. I just finished a book about Jeff Bezos. He hung out with his grandfather on a farm. And he attributes a lot of his success to that, And so, I think Eli knows this. We hung out with a variety of people, of family mostly, but very different. Dissecting people out into age groups is a really bad thing.
I think there's a lot to be said from learning from your elders. What do you think about Peter Thiel, who's dumping a shit ton of money into anti-aging? Basically, he's convinced that aging is just a disease that can be cured. What do you think about that aspect of the?
There's some truth to it, but there's, like all truth, there's a limit. And he is basically along the lines of this Google employee who was on his own, a famous inventor named Ray Kurzweil, who ironically, I read a book he co-wrote called Transcend Health. And he wrote it with a doctor out of Colorado who has an anti-aging group. Ironically, I emailed him and I said, hey, I'm interested in your book. He's like, oh, what's your address? I'll mail you one. And it was signed by him and I think Ray Kurzweil. I'm not sure if they both signed it. And actually that got me on this. And if you read that book, he really goes into this nanobots going into your body and healing cancer, and eventually we'll make incremental aging improvements for about 5 to 10 years. We'll get to 110, 120, 130. We'll get to 150 eventually. And then there'll be this incremental, like more exponential thing that will boost us to 300 or 400. That's the idea. And then he eventually thinks we could get to 1,000, which is like,
what's the point?
Wow, I got to change my retirement plan.
I don't know if you guys have heard all this. So that's Ray Kurzweil. He's really out there. It's Silicon Valley. I would love to have a conversation with Peter Thiel and tell him, as a doctor, I haven't seen it. And by the way, there's some famous marathon runners and anti-aging people, if you look back in history, that all claim the same thing and are dead. They died in their 60s and 70s. There was a guy who did like these gymnastics things, and he was from LA, and he was like, oh, you do all this stuff, you're going to live forever. And he died in his 70s.
Was it that guy, Pilates guy?
Yeah, like one of those guys. So let's face it, we're not there yet, but I do think I have, some 90 and 100-year-olds that I think the brain starts to fade away, and that's another thing. But I would say I'm optimistically in the 130s to 150s in the next 20 to 30 years. But the Peter Thiel thing is a little hubris and arrogance. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you're going to live much longer than anybody else. And try, but the problem with this debate is we just have to wait and see. And people forget, but you can't answer this question in 5 or 10 minutes. And there are some sort of studies on the intermittent fasting and how fruit flies and rats and whatever live longer. And there is some data there. And
I think for me, so I always joke with people. I was like, I just want to go get 50 more years just because I want to see where technology's at. Whether that's like downloading your brain and going into some like whatever world or VR world. But I just want to see, because like the exponential growth of technology is just ridiculous. Like we're just looking at things, and I mean, even the vaccine that we're taking, the technology for that is just like
amazing.
How crazy is it to go to what's this to vaccinating millions of people in a year, and to have the ability to find issues at the 6 people level, that's stunning too. I mean,
Yeah.
every piece of this is wow. If we'd looked at this even a few years ago, it would have been insanity. Now
Yeah,
it's
the mRNA technology. It was a good program on Frontline about how China finally released the code, and Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech started literally downloaded the code and started working on it and got it like ready to go into clinical trials. By the time we got to lockdown, May, March, April, they were doing clinical trials in 4 months. Was insane. So I think people get the point I would make too is like, it's not about quantity in life. It's about the quality. And if you're 150 and you look great and feel great, good for you. But if you're just like decrepit in bed, what is that? You know, I always tell patients who have family members dying in nursing homes or hospitals, and they have a hard time letting go. And I say, look, this is not life. What's life is outside. That's life. And you kind of have to let this go, because no matter how hard it is, you got to let it go, because it really isn't really life. It's just something else, you know? And that's what I'm worried
beautiful.
about with people trying to live longer is,
Yeah.
you know.
My only reason, I just want to see
Beautiful.
that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Rodney. This has been awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
This is random. Yeah, I just happened to be in town. I was surprising his mom, and then when I got to town, I said maybe I should call a few people just to make sure. And it turns out like half the family's out of town.
Yeah, I was in St. Louis. I was like, well, I'll come a day early because he wants to come see my farm and stuff.
I can't
So
wait
was
to
like,
see the farm.
yeah,
That goes back to that nature fix that we were talking about.
yeah,
So
yeah. I was actually walking in the park a couple of days ago, and I felt like I in my farm so much. I mean, I'm 3 to 6 hours a day over there. I was literally walking through the park and just looking at these trees, and I felt like this connection to these trees
yeah,
that I'd never noticed before. And I think when I'm in my farm, I'm completely engulfed by them. When I'm
Yeah.
walking through this park and just seeing a few of them just kind of in the parks in St. Louis. I mean, they had the World's Fair in the early 1900s there. So they have these amazing, beautiful parks,
Yeah.
these trees that were planted in the early 1900s. It's just beautiful to walk through there and just see these old 100-year-old trees. And there's something about the outdoors, man. And speaking of the outdoors.
Speaking of trees, there's this German ecologist or botanist that wrote a book about trees. It's famous. I'll have to find it. But he claims that trees talk to each other.
Yeah, for sure.
They help each other survive.
So
there's a pretty good data on that, actually.
So
and that's really interesting.
I
was trying to find the name of the book.
I can't remember the guy's name, the big mushroom guys. I think his name is Stamos is the last name. But he basically discovered that
It's the mycelium.
Mycelium.
It's
it's basically like an internet.
Yes,
that's connected.
It's the internet. Yeah. And they help each other out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Rodney, thanks for joining us. We're right at the hour mark. It was a good show. Good to get a doctor on here to give us some officiality to our our midlife craziness that we're going through. So everybody, please like our show, share it, and comment below. And we'd love to hear from you guys, and we'll catch you guys next week.